Uh-oh. Okay, we'll start with this. This weekend, on the undercard of Fisher vs. Allen 2, a Matchroom show, we're going to be seeing Shannon Ryan returning to action in an 8-rounder. Opposite the ring, Farah El Bousairi, experienced, been around the block, been in there with some really good fighters in what will be Shannon's second fight since dropping a decision to Emma Doolin. Farah El Bousairi sports a professional record of 10 wins with 5 losses, no draws, 3 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 15 professional bouts, more professional contests than young Shannon Ryan, though not a higher ceiling. Shannon sports a professional record of 8 wins with 1 loss, no draws, 1 knockout, having never been knocked out in 9 professional bouts, last in action in December of last year. Opposite the ring, Kate Radomska, who she stopped in the 3rd round of a contest scheduled for 8. And she'll be fighting in another 8-rounder this weekend. I think that Shannon needs to build herself up a bit more before she so challenges for an alphabet title. So far, she's only fought in a 10-rounder 2 times. In the Jasmina Sopotnetska fight, the Emma Doolin fight. Those are very good fighters, by the way. Though in the both of those fights, there were noticeable gas tank issues. Shannon Ryan is a fighter that carries some musculature, and she starts off very hard and very fast, but fades down the stretch. They've got to work on that, and she's got to get used to fighting the championship distance, and not just in 10-rounders, but in 10-rounders against formidable adversaries. Her opponent this weekend has been in there with anyone from Kim Clavel to Alexas Kubitsky to Fabiana Batiki. She's been around, seemingly losing every step-up fight that she's ever been in. So it's that kind of opponent to where she can give Shannon some rounds and give Shannon some work, but Shannon's not under much threat of losing this thing. There are 3 champions at this weight. One of them is going to be in action this weekend. Japan's own Mizuki Hiruta will be defending her title. There is also Irma Garcia holding the IBF, Ashley Gonzalez holding the WBC, and Jasmine Artiga holding the WBA. Of the 4 champions at this weight, I would say that Jasmine is the weakest link, based on what I've seen. She's the most beatable. In fact, she should have got beat in her last fight against Regina Chavez on Pro Box that was scored a decision for Jasmine, though not based on what I saw. Based on what I saw, she got beat up. Yeah, she should have lost. WBA champion via the WBA's ranked standings, Shannon Ryan's name does not appear there. But she might want to go that route. She might want to go in that direction because, as stated, Jasmine is the weakest link of the 4 champions at this weight, and we're starting to see a lot of movement in the super flyweight division, as this past weekend we saw not 1, but 2 very talented unbeaten up-and-comers in Nat Dove and Nayeli Rodriguez as part of the MVP show on Friday. They gave a fantastic account of themselves against each other, and this weekend we're seeing Shannon Ryan, we're seeing Mizuki Hiruta, we're seeing that the super flyweight division is now starting to get more attention than it usually does. It's always been a deep division, and one of the deeper divisions in women's boxing, but the major promotional outfits did not always have prized stallions at this weight the way they do now. Because they do, this division is starting to get a lot more exposure. I expect Shannon Ryan to do the business this weekend I expect her to win a points decision. I don't know that she's going to knock out Farah El Bousairi. Farah's never been knocked out. Farah's never been stopped, and having more fights and more experience than Shannon Ryan, she at minimum may know how to survive, even in a fight that she's losing. So I'm going with Shannon to win on points.
We'll see if the prediction sticks.
One that did this past weekend in the Souleymane Cissokho versus Kavaliauskas fight. I went with Souleymane Cissokho to win.
He survived not one, but two knockdowns to win this WBC final eliminator.
Welterweight Souleymane Cissokho survived two knockdowns to edge Kavaliauskas in a title eliminator on Saturday at the Centre de Conference de Sipopo in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea. Cissokho won a unanimous decision with scores of 114-112, 115-111, and 116-110. The first round saw both fighters cautious, with Cissokho circling the ring while each sought to establish their jabs. In round two, Kavaliauskas continued pressing forward, forcing Cissokho to expend significant early energy moving around the ring. A left hook from Kavaliauskas dropped Cissokho at the end of the second round.
You often hear me talk about what usually happens when pressure fighters fight pure boxers, Igas being the pressure guy and Cissokho being the pure boxer.
And the two knockdowns in this fight accent the difficulty that pure boxers often face when facing pressure fighters.
They're polar opposites in terms of styles.
Subsequent rounds saw Kavaliauskas, trained by Marcos Contreras, moving forward persistently, though not always landing punches effectively, as Cissokho proved elusive while landing stinging jabs. At the start of the fifth round, Kavaliauskas landed a short left uppercut to Cissokho's head, sending him tumbling out of the ring. Cissokho beat the count, but appeared dazed, yet somehow he made it out of the round. In the sixth, Cissokho rebounded by outboxing Kavaliauskas, winning the round after his worst round of the night. In the seventh, Kavaliauskas staggered Cissokho, but found himself outworked again. Cissokho, trained by Virgil Hunter, was unwilling to be trapped on the ropes. Sensing a close fight, Kavaliauskas started the eighth round as the aggressor and regained momentum. In the ninth, Cissokho became even more elusive as Kavaliauskas couldn't repeat his earlier success. Rounds began to blur together in Cissokho's favor. In the final round, Kavaliauskas charged forward, looking to make something happen while Cissokho avoided him well. Cissokho's composure led to the biggest win of his career, the most significant so far. You may remember Souleymane Cissokho fighting on some matchroom shows a ways back.
And you might also remember that he got his start off not at welter, but at junior middle. He eventually moved down to welter, which means he's got very big physical dimensions for a welterweight. He's tall, he's got length.
That I think to some extent lends itself to his durability, his wherewithal, because he had to go through some adversity in this fight, accenting what usually happens when you put pure boxers in there with pressure fighters like Kavaliauskas. It makes for a difficult fight. For pure boxers in particular, it makes for a difficult night because they're polar opposites. The pure boxer wants to fight at a slow, controlled pace, not taking many risks, whereas the pressure guy throws caution to the wind, crashes the pocket, tries to throw punches in bunches.
Nowhere near as much emphasis on defense as what you're getting from that pure boxer, but I think what saved Souleymane Cissokho in this situation is that he's a bigger welterweight than your average welterweight,
improving to a record of 18 wins with no losses, 9 knockouts as the 33-year-old boxer, who was a 2016 Olympian representing France, is now the mandatory challenger for WBC welterweight champion Mario Barrios. Barrios has been rumored to be facing a 46-year-old Manny Pacquiao in July.
Now it comes to it. In spite of Souleymane Cissokho's significant win this weekend in New Guinea, I do not expect him to crash Manny and Mario's party.
That is, I do not expect the World Boxing Council to put the winner under much pressure to face Souleymane Cissokho thereafter, as they don't keep the same energy with all of their mandatory challengers. They're Johnny on the spot with some, lackadaisical with others.
Consider how Johnny on the spot they were with the mandatory at 175 when it comes to Bivol and Benavidez. They were not next in the rotation. They weren't next in the queue, but they ordered that fight ahead of schedule. Why didn't they do that at middleweight with Carlos Adames and Jermall Charlo?
Why weren't they so Johnny on the spot then? And what about Errol Spence Jr. when he was WBC champion? He won the title in 2019, and I don't think he ever satisfied a mandatory for them, one that they ordered.
They never ordered Canelo versus Benavidez.
For obvious reasons, accenting what I'm telling you, that they don't keep the same energy for all of their mandatory challengers. So when I see that Souleymane Cissokho has become Mario Barrios' mandatory, well, I don't think they're going to put Mario under any pressure to fight him, or Manny if he beats Mario. No, I would sooner expect Rolly Romero to challenge the winner of that fight for the green and gold before Souleymane Cissokho.
Why?
Because the WBC's bylaws are a poor excuse for due process. At the end of the day, all they're really doing is angling for the biggest sanctioning fees from the biggest fights. They don't care about the guys like Souleymane Cissokho. All they're going to do with him is give him an interim title, charge him sanctioning fees to keep it,
Whilst delaying his title shot.
like what they did to Carlos Adames. In the end, they never ordered the fight between him and Jermall.
They were never going to.
The only reason Carlos is WBC champion now is because of Jermall Charlo's problems outside of the ring. He had his own issues with drugs or substance abuse or mental health, whatever it was.
But there was no urgency to order that fight like I expect. There will not be any urgency to order this one. And without a major promotional outfit behind him, Souleymane Cissokho may get stuck in limbo.
I would pick Souleymane Cissokho to beat Mario Barrios, just like I picked him to beat Kavaliauskas. He'd probably beat Manny too, in similar fashion to how Yordeni Slugas beat Manny. Manny's 46. He's a legend.
But he's old. Not gonna look at him through rose-tinted lenses. If Souleymane got him in the ring, he'd probably beat him and he'd probably beat Mario. The issue is he won't get his crack at the apple.
Fighting on some small show in Equatorial New Guinea, I don't get the sense he's got any ties to Matchroom anymore. They must have cut him from the roster some time ago.
Bitch.
So he's secured his position as the mandatory challenger. Now I expect the World Boxing Council to order him to have fights in the interim.
Against other guys in their rankings.
Because like I said, they're not going to put Manny or Mario, whoever wins their fight, under any pressure to face him. They're going to keep the way clear for a Rolly Romero fight, likely, for as long as they can.
Or Ryan, if he beats Rolly in a rematch.
Now, as it pertains to that fight between Manny and Mario, that weekend, I should say, that is set to be one of the busier weekends on the boxing calendar, you've got Usyk versus Dubois 2 happening that same day, Pacquiao versus Barrios, the rematch between Fundora and Zhu on that undercard, and going head-to-head with that show is Rodriguez versus Cafu.
I want to start off by saying that the crown jewel of that weekend has to be Usyk versus Dubois because there's nothing like a heavyweight title fight. The air of spontaneity you generally see when the big men are going at it, that they're always one punch away from being knocked out, and the backstory between Usyk and Dubois, the controversy, manufactured or otherwise, that's the biggest fight that weekend.
Not just because they're the biggest guys, but it's for the biggest money. I'm pretty sure that Daniel and Usyk are making more money that weekend than anybody else.
Fighting in front of a bigger audience than anybody else. That's a stadium fight. That's happening at Wembley. Every other show that weekend is happening in front of a relatively smaller crowd.
By every quantifiable metric that you use to gauge what fight is bigger than another, Usyk versus Dubois, the rematch, is the biggest fight happening that weekend, even if the Americans aren't all that interested in it, because Usyk is from the Ukraine and Daniel's from the UK. That doesn't change, that it's a bigger fight than anything else happening that weekend.
The other problem, that I expect the both of those fights to be billed as pay-per-views. They haven't said it yet, but I expect that Usyk versus Dubois is going to be a pay-per-view for the Americans, not just the Brits.
If Conor Benn versus Chris Eubank Jr. was billed as a pay-per-view in this part of the world, you can expect that this fight will be too, at which point the audience has to make a decision. Who do they want to give their money to? Usyk versus Dubois or Pacquiao versus Barrios? What's worth more to you?
At a time where piracy is at an all-time high, it would be quite naive to expect the consumer to purchase both pay-per-views. I'm going to, but I ain't everybody.
The other problem is that Matchroom has a show going head-to-head with the Pacquiao versus Barrios fight that won't cost you anything extra, any additional charge. The unification match between Bam Rodriguez and Thumalele Kafu. And I understand that Americans don't traditionally watch the lower weights, the flyweights or the super flyweights.
But one fight is likely going to cost you $80, and one fight ain't going to cost you nothing extra.
The Pacquiao versus Barrios fight will have the anticipated rematch between Sebastian Fundora and Tim Kazoo. Their initial meeting was billed as a pay-per-view, but it didn't sell much of anything. Still, an aesthetically pleasing fight, an action fight, it did deliver,
but it was grossly overpriced.
And so they've paired it with the Pacquiao versus Barrios fight, making it the co-main event to the main event. But I don't know that that's going to result in an uptick in buys, because neither Tim Tszyu or Sebastian Fundora have a big following in America. They don't.
And Manny?
Manny used to. We all remember a time when Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather were the two biggest names in the sport, but that time has come and gone. The last time we saw Manny,
3 years ago,
in the Ugas fight that didn't sell very much, all it brought in was a little over 200,000 buys, accenting Manny's diminished drawing power and the ongoing instability in the American market at a time where piracy is at an all-time high and there's inflation all over the place. The boxing community at large is not in a hurry to spend $80 to see a fight. And that was 3 years ago. 3 years later, when Manny is 46 years old, 3 years removed from the sport,
you expect him to do better?
There is also talk of Carlos Adames boxing on this undercard in defense of the green and gold title. I think it would go a long way towards helping this show's marketability if it were against the Yanibek Alimkhanalai, that if they could make that fight happen on this undercard, then I'd say, well, that's value for money. You're getting a unification match at middle, a solid fight at junior middle, and in the main event, you've got Manny. Now that may seem like asking a lot, but the boxing sphere is asking a lot of its consumers.
Every other month now, there's a pay-per-view, and the customers have got pay-per-view fatigue.
The way I see it, 2 pay-per-views happening the same weekend and having to go head-to-head with a regular show, not pay-per-view, none of that lends itself to the buy rate for the Pacquiao versus Barrios fight. They've got some problems.
I'm likely going to buy both pay-per-views, but I'm a content creator. That's my bread and butter.
It's not an accurate representation of what your average customer is going to do that weekend. Average customer might only buy one of those pay-per-views or none. Steal them both.
We're talking about the Americans.
Now, the saving grace for Usyk versus Dubois as a pay-per-view is it's not necessarily targeting an American audience. It's over there in the UK, where the boxing market is more vibrant and robust. Daniel is riding high. Alexander Usyk is as well.
They're not relying on an American audience or American money, so they're going to be okay.
The bulk of the buys is going to come from the Brits, and whatever else they can scrape up in America,
they're going to be all right. But I can't say the same for Pacquiao versus Barrios. How many people do you expect to buy that fight?
How many boxing fans hear the name of Manny Pacquiao and still get excited when he is 46?
How many?